We are entering the 32nd year of broadcasting with 21st Century Radio. That is a record, period. Actually, it's a world record, which was born in Baltimore in January of 1988. Our purpose has always been to introduce our audience to the new paradigm. Today, there are thousands of radio shows and podcasts that cover these same new age or new paradigm or paranormal topics, but back then, we were the only ones in the country. Sadly, one of those pioneering radio hosts, Art Bell, who created Coast to Coast Radio, a dear friend of ours, has moved on into the spiritual dimensions this past weekend. And he will be sorely missed. Thank you, Brother Art, for assisting and supporting the New Paradigm movement and reaching so many people. Also, sadly, since we've been on the air for over 30 years, many of our pioneering guests on 21st Century Radio have also passed on into the world of spirit. All of them champions of the new paradigm who can no longer be heard on 21st Century Radio, except you can, of course, hear their tapes. I'm talking about people like Brother Christopher Bird, our very dear friend and best man at my wedding to Dr. Zahara in 1980. Chris Bird joined us starting in 1988 to talk about his books on the divining hand. What a book that is, the 500-year-old mystery of dowsing. And he also joined us with his co-author Peter Tompkins on the books Secrets of the Soil and The Secret Life of Plants in 1988 and 1989. In that same year, Dr. Barry Fell joined us to discuss his books America BC and Bronze Age America and Saga America. And in 1989, Dr. Cyrus Gordon joined us to talk about his important work Before Columbus. And that really opened my eyes and ears of our listeners about who came to America before Columbus. And then Dr. Roy P. Mackle joined us to discuss the search for living sauropods in Africa, living dinosaurs. And I will never forget the work of Sister Gloria Farley, whose 472-page book, In Plain Sight, Old World Records in Ancient America, was most fascinating. But unfortunately, all of those that we interviewed, that I mentioned, have moved on into the spiritual dimensions and can no longer be contacted physically. There are other ways to contact them, of course. Now, why am I telling you this? Because for both hours tonight, our guest will be Glenn Kreisberg, the author of Spirits in Stone, The Secrets of Megalithic America, Decoding the Ancient Cultural Stone Landscapes of the Northeast. Of the thousands of books Dr. Zahara and I have reviewed from our perspective thesis, this book is one of the top 10 of the most important works that we've reported on. This is a must-read book, especially for those who want to understand the history of America's origins. Author Glenn Kreisberg is a radio frequency engineer, writer, researcher, licensed outdoor guide, and former editor of the author of the month page at grandhancock.com. He serves as Director-at-Large for the New England Antiquities Research Association, the editor of Lost Knowledge of the Ancients and Mysteries of the Ancient Past. He is the co-founder of Overlook Mountain Center in Woodstock, New York, which obviously we need to talk about as well. And we are thrilled that my daughter Anna and her wife Elise will profit greatly because they are living in Saugerties in the Woodstock area and hope to open a restaurant in the area where standing stones are found. Oh, brother Sir Paul McCartney would be very interested in this particular topic tonight because of his interest in the United Kingdom's standing stones. Welcome to 21st Century Radio, Glenn.
Thanks for having me, Bob. Good evening.
I really enjoyed your book. I read every word in it. I did not read all of your index, though, so I have to confess that. Um, tell us about, before we start, tell us about Overlook Mountain Center and its various goals.
Well, Overlook Mountain Center is a nonprofit we started about 5 years ago now. It came about because the land that some of these stone sites sat upon became threatened. It was about 80 acres up on Overlook Mountain, which is a kind of a very important, some considered sacred mountain in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And um, what happened was everybody thought this land was already protected, but it turned out that it wasn't. And the people who owned it, as they aged, they turned out needed money, and they put this land on the market, and it became threatened. So some of the local residents kind of sprang into action. We organized and started fundraisers, some crowdsourcing fundraisers online, going door to door in the neighborhood around where this property was and getting the neighbors interested in protecting it. And we were able to get a local family foundation along with some local residents to come up with the funds, and we created this nonprofit so that the land could be purchased and protected and preserved and also researched. So we have this property, and there is no physical Overlook Mountain Center, although one day maybe there will be. But through the organization, we carry out outdoor education and workshops focusing on landscape archaeology and archaeoastronomy. And we've taken hundreds of groups on tours of the property, showing them the features, the stone constructions, the effigies, their relationship to the sky, to the earth, to the plane of the living. And it's been a wonderful experience, and we've hopefully opened a lot of eyes.
That's just so fantastic. Congratulations, Glenn. You know, I wish other people in other parts of our country could have done the same thing instead of everything turning into more apartments and buildings, that kind of thing. So, well, how did you become interested in this subject?
Well, I guess my interest goes back to when I was a teenager. I was lucky enough to work in an antiquarian bookstore here in Woodstock called Three Geese in Flight, which still exists online. And the owner, Sam Wenger, is a very good friend of mine. He's an authority on and scholar on Celtic mythology. And he introduced me to a lot of books and authors at a young age. And I was able to read, and this is going back 30 years when some of these books came out, and you mentioned some of them in your intro. Barry Fell's America BC and Saga Americana, Salvador Trento's The Search for Lost America. I was reading Holy Blood and Holy Grail by Michael Baget back when nobody really knew what the Da Vinci Code was all about.
Yeah.
So through this reading and hanging out in this bookstore and reading these books, it just kind of got into me through osmosis, and I became familiar with a lot of mythologies and folklores and legends of different cultures and ancient societies.
Well, then how did this book come about?
Well, it was a long process. Let's put it that way. I am a radio frequency engineer. I work designing the wireless networks that we all rely on to share the information that's so important to us. And I was sitting on a town committee probably a dozen years ago, I want to say 2006, that was trying to, it was a cell tower siting committee. So I was involved with trying to pick a site in the town to put the cell tower. And part of that process was an evaluation of the land that the cell tower is going to sit on. And some of the local residents, again, this is up on Overlook Mountain, during the public hearing process, brought to the attention of the board that there were these stone constructions that they hoped would not be disturbed. So there were some efforts made to protect them. The cell tower was built. Some of them were unfortunately destroyed, but they were documented, and it began a process for me of trying to figure out and understand what these were, because they were not considered by the historians, by the archaeologists who look at them, to be anything special. They were just considered to be kind of a dime a dozen stone pile left by early American or colonial activity, which to me is still important, and it's a cultural resource, but it's not something that's ancient or necessarily sacred. But then there were people who were saying that these were something else, and that they were not just the earlier colonial, early American constructions, but that they might be Native American origin, and that definitely got me interested in trying to understand them in their true cultural context. And that's what got me involved with this group, NERA, the New England Antiquities Research Association, because they were the group that the homeowners and the citizens who showed up at the meeting had referenced as, a resource to understand what these could possibly be. So we reached out to them, and they came and looked, and we ended up having some tribal preservation officers from the Stockbridge-Munsee come and look at some of these constructions, and they agreed that they probably were Native American, and probably this was a sacred site that we were looking at. So being an outdoor guide, I spent a lot of time in the backwoods and exploring off trail, and I came upon a lot of these things in my own wanderings. And I had always just considered them, again, kind of what you'd expect to see in a landscape, having had been built over the last couple hundred years and occupied. But I started to realize there was a much greater mystery involved with some of these, and began looking at them in a new way, and trying to kind of understand what their true meaning could be.
You really built a good bridge between your work and your type of research, and the more those who adhere more to a very scientific perspective, and have really been actually helping establish a kind of a working partnership with them, which I think was fantastic. That's a hard thing to do, and it has obviously had much to do with your research methodology. Could you tell us about your research methodology?
Sure. Well, I guess I would say I take the GIS approach, global information systems. I do a lot of mapping and plotting of site locations. And what this allows you to do is you build a database of your different sites, the locations, the features, the elevation, all the data that you can gather. You put it into a database that allows you to sort and filter and create thematic maps from the data. Mm-hmm. And this reveals patterns. You're looking for concentrations of different features, distributions of different features and sites on the landscape. And one of the patterns that was revealed through this methodology was the relationship to the sites, to each other, and to events on the horizon, such as solstice and equinox, sunrises and sunsets. But there are also other patterns that are revealed having to do with the place names of where these locations were. In the Catskills here, which was settled by the Dutch, a lot of the place names the Calvinist Dutch gave to the locations where the Native Americans held their sacred ceremonies were devils. Devil's Kitchen, Devil's Tombstone, Devil's Acre, Devil's Path. All these are names in the Catskills that kind of remind us that, okay, when the settlers first got here, they saw the Native Americans doing things. Of course, the Dutch considered the natives to be devil worshippers, so they gave these names devil to reflect that belief. This incorrect belief, of course, because the Native Americans were not anything such as devil worshippers, but much more practiced a form of shamanism that we would recognize. So my methodology is to kind of understand these locations on the landscape, how they relate to each other, and how they might possibly relate to events in the sky. Through the eyes of archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology.
Well, with that, we need to take a break, and when we come back with Glenn Kreisberg, we are going to be talking about his criteria, his site criteria. There go the Stones. Oh, gosh, that was a really strange time. The battle between the Stones and the Beatles. Remember the battle between the Stones and the Beatles, Glenn?
I guess I do. I have to admit my age, but I do remember it.
Well, I'm 74, so I think I'm probably twice as old as you are, right?
No, but you got 15 years on me.
Okay. Now we know how old you are. We can figure it out now. Okay. Please tell us about what is your site criteria?
Site criteria. Okay, what makes the grade? Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of stonework out there in the Northeast. In fact, in an 1880 census, that the U.S. Census, part of that was a stone fence survey of New England. They surveyed stone walls and stone fences throughout New England and discovered in the census, it was reported there were 240,000 miles of stonework in the Northeast. So that's enough to reach to the moon or wrap around the Earth 10 times, if you can imagine that.
No,
so,
I can't.
A huge amount of stonework. And it dawned on me that there's no way all of this could have been built in a period of time that the colonists and settlers and early Americans were here. In fact, there wasn't a population big enough to do this. Every man, woman, and child would have had to have built miles of wall themselves. So how do you distinguish? So obviously some of this was pre-existing. Some of this stonework was here already when Europeans arrived, but how do you distinguish that from what is something that is Native American or indigenous and was here before, from the field clearing and the property subdivision and the road making and everything that involves stonework, quarrying. So it's in some ways a process of elimination. And you're looking for features at these sites such as stone walls or cairns, stone piles or dolmens, perched boulders, effigies, stone symbols, or alignments. And these are going to distinguish them, if these aspects are present, from early American or colonial constructions. So stone walls, what would make a stone wall special? Well, most of the stone walls that we see in the Northeast that are associated with agriculture or farming or land subdivision and surveying are kind of neat, orderly walls that go in straight lines that delineate property boundaries. So if you get into the deeds, you go to the local real property tax office in the county and you start looking at property deeds and reading descriptions and going back in time and reading the property boundaries and trying to understand the kind of the chronology of that piece of land. Sometimes you'll discover that these stone walls and stone piles were there from the very start, from the very beginning, from the very first subdivisions. So other obvious things about stone walls is, of course, if they serve no purpose, if you see they are not an enclosure, they don't appear to be aligned with any property boundaries, or if they're just not straight and they are curving and serpentine, these are clues that they're probably not colonial or early American, but more likely Native American in their origin. Same with cairns. If you see a pile of stones that looks like it was just made to get them out of the way and clear a field, and they're just stacked up, and there are lots of piles of stones stacked up in the woods and in the meadows and fields in the Northeast. But if you come across ones that are really well formed, and you could tell a lot of care went into them, and there's probably something more to it than just getting them out of the way. And what we find in the cairns up on Overlook Mountain and in the other cairn sites in the Catskills is we usually find them on southeasterly facing slopes of the mountains. We usually find them between a certain elevation, on the mountainsides, kind of higher up the slopes. We usually find, not always, but certain aspects of them that may contain donation stones, stones that are not native to the area, quartzite or hematite, iron oxide, donation stones that are left on these piles. You can examine whether these stones are kind of part of the structural, if they're structural or if they're just placed there. They could have a certain meaning. The same with effigies. If we see a wall that's serpentine or a pile of stones that resembles a turtle, and we do see numbers of those, many of them, and there's a whole chapter of turtle cairns and turtle effigies in the book. These again are clues that probably not early American or made by the settlers, but made by the original inhabitants of our land. So it shouldn't be that unusual to find a turtle symbol or a turtle effigy of stone in a site that's Native American, because of course the turtle plays such a prominent role in the mythology, specifically in the creation mythology of so many Native American tribes. It's one of those stories that's universal in their creation story. The turtle is always featured very prominently. In fact, Native Americans consider North America Turtle Island, and this goes back to that creation myth involving the turtle.
Yeah.
So these are all, I guess, through process of elimination and deed research, ways to see if the site meets the criteria to be considered a potential Native American sacred site, or if it's just a collection of stones that's left over from activity that took place during the early times of settlers and American history.
Your book has a wonderful foreword by good old Graham Hancock. Tell us about your association with Graham Hancock. I have great regard for this man.
Graham and his wife Santha are a wonderful couple, wonderful people. I'm good friends with them and have been for over a decade. It all started actually when I was reading his book. I believe it was Underworld, and there was a chapter on Malta, and the temples in Malta really fascinated me. And one of the things I noticed about the temples, that from a bird's eye view, they very much resembled a radio frequency pattern with a main lobe and side lobes and nodes between them, kind of like a glove on a hand or a mitten. Mm-hmm. A antenna pattern has a very specific shape to it. Depending on the frequency, the shape varies, but it does have a kind of a uniform shape. And looking at these temples on Malta, some of the oldest structures on Earth dating back 5,000 years, I couldn't help but notice the resemblance and the commonality between the configuration of the temples and this antenna pattern. So I felt compelled to point this out to Graham. I sent an email. I had no expectation of any kind of response, but he got back to me. Said what the observation I made was, I thought it was interesting. Asked me if I would be interested in writing an article about it, and he talked me into it, and he published it on his website, and it got a little bit of attention. It was republished in Atlantis Rising, the magazine that you might be familiar with.
Oh, sure.
And it led to me going and giving a talk in 2014 on the island of Malta, the first international conference on archaeoacoustics. And there have been two others since then. And that was a fascinating experience and gave me a chance to do some research at the temples in Malta, having to do with sound and frequency and energy and how they interact with the temples and specifically the configurations of the temple. So that was first how I got in contact, and then we had met in person at the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, CPAC, that takes place yearly out west, sometimes in California, sometimes in Sedona. Walter Cruttenton is the director of that conference. I've had the pleasure to attend many times and was also a presenter in 2010. And again, gave me an opportunity to meet some of the other researchers in this field and exchange ideas and get to know one another a little bit, so collaborate some.
Well, obviously, there are so many interesting areas within your book that our listeners will find as well. What are your favorite or most interesting sites?
Well, you briefly mentioned the chapter on Danskamer Point on the Hudson River, and this is something any of your listeners, if they grab a map or go to Google Earth and work your way up the Hudson River from New York City on the west side, just above the city of Newburgh, you'll come across Danskamer Point, originally called Duval Danskamer by the Dutch crew of Henry Hudson's ship on his third voyage of discovery to America. He came up the Hudson River, and on the evening, I believe of the third night, they passed Danskamer Point and saw a ceremony taking place with many Indians dancing around rings of fire. And of course, to the shipmates on the Half Moon, they saw this as devil worship, and they called it and Danskamer, Duval Danskamer translates in Dutch into English as Devil's Dance Chamber. And so Danskamer Point was always a place that interested me. Unfortunately, in the late 30s, it was developed into a power station. So anything that was originally there was destroyed. But because it had the name chamber in it, the word chamber in its name, I always found it fascinating. Was there a stone chamber there? There are many stone chambers just across the river in Putnam and Dutchess County, well known to a lot of researchers. John Burke did a lot of work on those. So I was really curious about Danskamer Point, and it all came together about 2 years ago when I started looking at the relationship between Danskamer Point, this very prominent point of land sticking out into the Hudson, and the mouth of the Wappingers Creek, which is right across the street, right across the river, right across the Hudson River from Danskamer Point. And just a little bit north, you'll see the mouth of Wappingers Creek, named for the tribe, the Wappingers Indian tribe that inhabited that area at the time of contact. And what I realized using my mapping tools, using Google Earth, was that the orientation of the mouth of Wappingers Creek to Danskamer Point was a perfect summer solstice sunrise alignment. And then the reciprocal from the mouth of the creek over Danskamer Point would be the winter solstice sunset. So to me, this explained and kind of solved the mystery of why Danskamer Point was a ceremonial place for the Native Americans. This is why when Henry Hudson sailed up the river in 1609, he saw a ceremony going on this spot, because this was the ceremony spot. This may have actually been, in a way, kind of an axis mundi, or the center of the universe for the Wappinger and for the local Indian tribes, realizing that there was a solstice sunrise alignment and sunset alignment with these prominent landscape features. It also turns out that the alignment of the winter solstice sunrise over the mouth of the creek during the course of that evening on the summer solstice, sun rises in that point. But what rises in that same point on that evening is Pleiades. And this also played a very important role in the mythology of the natives of the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yes, that's been well documented. So Danskamer Point is definitely one of my favorite sites. It's aligned on an equinox alignment with a wonderful site just a few miles to the west called Turtle Rock Ridge that has an awesome, huge turtle effigy. There's also some information on that, photographs of that. There's a winter solstice sunrise portal up on that mountaintop, as well as glyphs of the sun and what some interpret as a meteor event. There are these two inscribed circular shapes that seem to be falling and having trails behind them. So it could be a document or documentation of the early people having seen an event in the sky. They obviously were great sky watchers. In the Lenape tradition, the women, the Native American women, were the ones who were the sky watchers. But that makes sense because they were also the ones who did the planting.
Yes, that's true. Well, we got to take a break here, and when we come back, let's talk about those patterns that are revealed by your research with Glenn Kreisberg And the book, of course, is Spirits in Stone, The Secrets of Megalithic America, Bear & Company, available at Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, this is Ziggy Marley saying love, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus. One love, y'all. Well, this is one of the most interesting interviews, you know. Over the years I've been doing interviews, but this one is very special.
We got a copy of the book, and then all of a sudden my daughter wanted a copy of the book, and then my wife wanted a copy of the book. That's how important we feel this book is. Now, Glenn, what patterns are revealed by your research?
Well, I think it's safe to say that the patterns that are revealed are a relationship between these sites and their locations, their relationship to each other, and their relationship to events occurring in the heavens. So by that I mean that many of these sites display alignments, either an alignment with another site or a series of sites that connect to a point or are pointing to a place on the horizon where the sun is going to rise or set, usually on the longest or shortest days of the year, or on the equinox when the days are evenly split between light and dark. So these types of patterns certainly are not new. We've seen them, if you're familiar with David Overton's book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital.
Oh, yes. He was a good, dear friend of ours.
Wonderful book, and opened my eyes to the Masonic tradition of the layout of our capital, and how many of the roads and avenues are set at the angles that align with these solstices and equinoxes, and in some cases, the rise and setting of Venus, the morning star. So they were clued in. They were definitely clued into something much more ancient than just the founding of our country. Of course, many of those alignments are not recognized or even known or even realized today because modern construction have blocked them because people were not aware that these originally were intended to align with the sun shining down the avenue at a certain day, a certain time. But if we go back further, the Anasazi and Sexual Hopi, Gary David's book, Star Cities of the Southwest, documents how over many generations they moved their habitations and their encampments and their homes perfectly along the solstice alignments. And I found that very fascinating. So it's an ancient tradition, this pattern of building and aligning monuments with events in the sky, and we're just very disconnected with that kind of belief today. So we're kind of blind to it. But if you know the angles, if you know where to expect to see these events happen, and at our longitude up in here in upstate New York of 42 degrees north, the angles are fixed. So we understand what they are. When you do the measurements, it's different plotting them on the map as to measuring them in the field with the compass, because you have a difference of about 14 degrees due to declination. So you have to make those corrections. But if you know where to look and when to look, and you're at the right place at the right time, you can document these events and understand that there is a pattern. There was a wonderful researcher who's passed away named Enrique Angura, who used to run the tours of the chambers in Putnam County, these wonderful megalithic chambers that many of them have their entrances aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. And Enrique was in there in the 60s and 70s, every December 21st, freezing his ass off with his Super 8 film camera, shooting footage of the sun coming in right at sunrise and shooting a light dagger to the back of the chamber. So these patterns are there. They hold up. They're still existing today. You just have to kind of read the landscape, understand where they might occur, and position yourself so that you can witness them if and when they do. It's really fun and fascinating, and and eye-opening. And I like I said, Enrique did this. There were other folks. If you are familiar with James Mavor and Byron Dix's book Manitou, The Sacred Landscape of New England's Native Civilization, that very much influenced me and motivated me and inspired me to look into our region of upstate New York and the Catskills and Shawangunk Mountains to look for these types of sites that were documented in New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts by Byron Dix and James Mavor, who were no lightweights. These guys were serious engineers and architects and brought a true science to it and presented that in that book, Manitou.
Yes, they certainly did. I don't know. Your book must contain about 325,000 photos, and they are. And all right, okay. So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm just doing the same thing our president does all the time. There were that really they are fabulous. They are. You took them, didn't you?
Most of them I did. Yeah. If I came across one that was exceptional that somebody else took,
then you stole it, huh?
I would ask permission. and there's a few of them in there because people are always sending me stuff and sometimes I can't resist and I say, I'd like to put this in the book. Do you mind if I use that photo or so yeah, the pictures tell the story. Again, it's part of getting out in the woods and taking a hike and going and look at these things. You take some pictures, you come back and you can remember.
Yeah, well, I absolutely loved the boulders. The boulders, these large boulders, some really in the shape. Some of them, you don't have to use too much imagination to see a boulder that is worth, I don't know, how many tons, but is in the shape of a cat's head.
Sure, isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
There's a few examples of them, and yeah, these are probably 10-ton stones. The one in North Salem, very well known in Westchester County, and the one out there in Pennsylvania at the Council Rock site. They're almost identical. It's quite amazing. You look at these things and you say, okay, the same influence, the same idea, maybe the same people created these things. The chapter on Council Rock by Dave Gutowski, who discovered that site and purchased that land to protect it. Those are amazing boulders up there. You're right. One looks like a cat's head. One he calls the whale stone.
Oh, yes.
One looks like a bird, the bird stone.
Oh, the bird stone's terrific.
Yes,
your bird stone inspired me yesterday, and I was at a steeplechase race yesterday. And I found a tie that had little bluebirds on it that were about the same shape as the birdstone. And of course, I have about 14 billion ties, many of which I'll never wear except my yellow submarine ties. But I mean, it's just it's fascinating. It really is. And then all the different turtles, as you mentioned, all kinds of them. Some with their mouths open, etc. It's just such a thrill to read this book. When I came into incarnation in this particular life, my love of books in other previous lifetimes just led me to believe that, boy, I want to make sure people read and continue to read. But right now, we got to take our final break here for first hour, and we'll be back next hour. And we will continue with what aspects and features are in common with similar sites around the world. Now here, Sir Paul McCartney, if you're listening tonight, you've got to pay attention to what we're going to talk about next hour. Okay? We'll be back in just a few minutes with Spirits and Stones, Secrets of the Megalithic America, Bear & Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Cordner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington. And our guest, of course, is Glenn Kreisberg, Spirits and Stone. Kreisberg, sorry. My boss always corrects me. Kreisberg, Spirits and Stone, The Secrets of Megalithic America, published by Bear & Company, available at Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble, and on the links at the front page of 21stcenturyradio.com. Glenn, what aspects and features are in common with similar sites around the world? Sir Paul McCartney, wake up. Listen to this.
Well, in the book, I do examine important sites around the world for insights into ancient megalithic culture. And one of the things that I find in common is that in Northeast America, as in elsewhere, the pattern revealed through the landscape archaeology and the eye of archaeoastronomy speaks to the sophisticated belief system of an ancient population that understood the complex movements of the night sky and integrated those beliefs into their lives and into the worldview. I think, as in other places, here they accomplished this through the cultural practice of celestial observation, landscape manipulation, and monument construction, as well as through their travels and contacts with peoples from other regions and parts of the world. Of course, this is controversial information. In the Northeast, this is generally not accepted by the historians. I know the archaeologists locally. We've got Marilyn Johnson at Vassar. We've got Joseph Diamond at SUNY New Paltz. We've got Christopher Linder at Bard College. They're all wonderful archaeologists, but none of them would agree with most of what's in this book, the premise being that the Native Americans built in stone, and in some cases aligned those stone constructions to the movements of the heavens and events on the horizon. That's just not accepted in the Northeast. But throughout the rest of the world, and throughout the Western Hemisphere and the Southwest, in Central America, and Mexico, and South America with the Inca, and all these cultures are credited with having built in stone and having performed celestial observations and had that be an important part of their life and belief system and worldview. But the natives in the Northeast are not credited with such, and I think that's a terrible disservice.
It's a great disservice.
It is, because they were brilliant, they were creative, they had the ingenuity, they had the time to develop this, and that's the prejudice of and maybe it's a convenient truth or untruth that there was no civilization in the Northeast before the Europeans arrived. There was a great civilization that went back 10,000 years. We have places along the Hudson River, again, that the archaeologists admit have been continually inhabited for 10,000 years. Yeah. So this doesn't fit in the paradigm of the savage hunter-gatherer who roamed the land, just barely eking out an existence in post-glacial environments. The people who first showed up in the Northeast and in the Hudson Valley, these were master survivalists. They had come from other parts of the world where belief systems have been developed, and being in unity with the land and with nature was very much a part of existence. And they knew how to exploit the features and the resources of a region to make a good life for themselves, and that's pretty well understood. But the crediting them with having really had the wherewithal to create and sustain a civilization and develop sophisticated belief systems, they don't just make it in the view of the scholar and historians of our area. But I do have to say that is starting to change, thankfully.
It is.
There are researchers that I could name: Curtis Hoffman, UMass, Bridgewater. He's been doing a lot of research in this area. In 2014, there was a wonderful symposium held at Colgate University, hosted by Anthony Avini, and Avini is really probably the premier archaeoastronomer of America, but he's done most of his work in Central and South America. He does not or had not considered that some of the things that he had worked on in Central and South America were translatable to upstate New York, but he found out and again, there was this symposium, the Stars and Stones Symposium at Colgate University in December 2014, where
oh, that was really something.
yeah, he hosted that with oh gosh, I'm forgetting her name right now. She's the cultural resource manager for Fort Dix. She works for the Army, and she discovered a calendar site up there in Fort Dix, in upstate New York, that it displayed a lot of these aspects that we've been discussing. There were effigies, bare effigies. There were alignments with star rises. There were alignments with the solstices and equinox. And she brought this to, when they first discovered these things. And it's an interesting story because, of course, this is a military base, and I think they were looking to put a perimeter fence up or replace a perimeter fence or something, move a fence. And part of that was they had to do an assessment of the land, and the people who were looking at where they were going to put this fence came back to the cultural resource manager and said, we found these unusual stone piles. We don't know what the heck they are. And she didn't know what they were, so she started researching. Lori Rush is her name. Yeah. She's the archaeologist for the Army up there in the Adirondacks. And she came up with this beautiful site, this calendar site, effigy site, archaeoastronomy site, and she brought it to the attention of Tony Avini at Colgate, and it was such a big deal that they held a conference and invited, and this is really why it was an important moment, because they didn't just had the academics there, they also had the government regulators from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and from the Department of Interior and Parks, and from the New York State Department of Historic Preservation. And the third aspect was they also invited the tribal preservation officers. So you had Doug Harris, who's the TPO for the Narragansett, and you had preservation officers from the Wampanoag and from some of the tribes up in Ontario come down to Colgate for this event, which was held in the, I believe it's called the Tongue Visualization Center, which is a beautiful planetarium where they could actually put this stuff up on the ceiling, up on the roof, the days and the dates of these events, and they went through some of the mythologies of the native tribes to try to understand how they related to the sky, and it was a very important day because there was a coming together of these three different groups: the regulators, the academics, and the natives, all kind of for the first time on the same page, recognizing these types of sites and acknowledging that they exist in our region. And, Nancy Hunt, who is the New York State archaeologist, basically said this had not been on her radar. She did not know that things like this existed in our area, but now that she was made aware, she would begin to look, through a new set of eyes at some of these sites that are being threatened. And that's really what the message. One of the messages of the book is the importance of preserving these sites, recognizing them for their sacredness, for their ceremonial purpose, some of which are still used to this day, kind of in a clandestine way. But these sites are still visited. You do still find, burnt offerings of sage and things like that. They could be New Agers, they could be Native Americans who are still practicing their belief system and coming to these sites. It's hard to say, but there is a very important aspect to preventing destruction of these sites and also protecting them so that they're not misused by the public.
Well, obviously, I'm a bit disappointed with our particular administration and their treatment of the Native Americans. We destroy their sacred water areas. And who's responsible? Well, our president is at war with them along with the Koch brothers. They will do anything and everything to destroy them. I'm not exaggerating. This has been going on for a long, since not just this president, but the extreme right dislike, hate Native Americans in general. Not all of them, but in general. And it is this is one of the reasons why my wife and I and Laura and I have written books dealing with the importance of the Native Americans in regards to so much of this country and the founding of this country. And I can't feel anything but deep anger at all these Native Americans that have been destroyed, their children dying, and just, well, with the Koch brothers, it has a lot to do with fracking. They want to frack all over the place. If you take a look at what's happened to Georgia and other states that have used fracking, it's obvious that it is not a good thing to do. Now, excuse me, I had to get on my soapbox on that particular such situation.
Oh no, that's fine. I'm agreeing with you in what you're saying. It's a terrible lack of respect for the environment, a total disregard for any kind of personal integrity that would allow you to do such a thing. It is distressing, and it needs to be met kind of head on. And when you see the things that took place out west, as you alluded to, with the threatening, Standing Stone and the threatened water supply, these people were fighting for their lives, and of course fighting against, and in very unfair odds, a force that is almost unstoppable. And
against people that just don't tell the truth. They don't. Our president has not told the truth about this. And what was that story? I don't know if it was in the Washington Post or recently. They have counted 2,800 or so absolute lies by this particular president.
I think it was Dick Comey, not that I'm a huge fan, but when he said untethered to the truth, that's a perfect description.
Yes.
Of Donald Trump and just how he conducts himself. He very no relationship to the truth at all, unashamed liar. And I don't want to get into politics here, because that's not what we're here to talk about. And who knows what your listenership is all about. And it's a shame. And what I'd like to stress about the message of some of these sites, if you talk to the Native Americans about their spiritual beliefs and what they think the message or the meaning of these stone sites are, for them, it comes down to harmony and balance.
Right.
And having harmony and balance in their life, harmony and balance in their relationship to the world and nature. Something that we are just lacking, some of us more or less than others. But when you talk about the current administration, we're talking about a complete lack of harmony and balance. And
yeah, you're right. There is none. There is none.
It's on display.
They're all on display. That's a pretty good from that aspect. I'm laughing right now, but it's so pathetic. It's truly pathetic, because the world is looking at us as many of them as we're fools. Those people that supported this kind of lying and cheating have nothing to do with the basis of what Americans are all about. It's just the opposite. And for them not to be called out, the Republicans basically are not going to say anything about it, because they're scared to death of him. Absolutely scared of this man, and for good reason. Because the more stuff that's going to be dug out on him in the next couple of months, I think would be enough to frighten anybody as to what kind of person that was. And of course, my boss is saying, time out for a break here on 21st Century Radio, which we will do.
Hi, I'm Michael A. Cremo. I'm author of the book Forbidden Archaeology, and I'm very happy to be on 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus. It is a fascinating show, intellectually groundbreaking, presenting alternative points of view on all areas of science and popular culture.
Now, let's get back to Glenn. Glenn, are you still with us?
I'm here.
I hear you. Okay. All right. You're up and at 'em now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, what purpose do these types of sites serve then and now?
Well, that's part of the mystery. understanding them, in looking at other sites worldwide and trying to understand their use and see if there's a similar purpose behind these sites. You have to look at the practices that may have taken place at these locations by the ancient people who built and utilized them. And they were probably utilized for generations and generations in a similar way. John Burke, in his studies of the chambers in Putnam County, identified electromagnetic hotspots or anomalies associated with the entrances of some of the chambers. So these would be places where the Earth's own electromagnetic field is spiking, or in that particular location, usually due to the geologic features, the type of rock that's in the ground locally, and how it's configured, can cause fluctuations in the Earth's electromagnetic field. So it's interesting that they identified these, associated them with the chambers. Some of John Burke's work in Karnak in France showed that all of the north and south axes of the stones were aligned. So each stone has a magnetic north and south axis, each large megalithic stone. And he determined that they were all lined up with the norths on one end and the south on the other, kind of like the analogy would be a particle accelerator, a lot of magnets with all their polarities aligned to increase the particle acceleration. So there's a lot of clues here, and trying to bring them all together and understand what these purposes were. I guess for me, the common denominator is that they were probably sites where people gathered and took part in ceremonies to alter their state of consciousness. And this was possibly for different reasons, but usually to facilitate some type of communication with the spirit world or the another dimension or another realm, where wisdom was sought, so I think that is certainly one of the main reasons these sites were built as temples or places where people could take part in raising their consciousness and connecting with the spirit world. But I also think they served other purposes, and that would probably relate today to what we would call science, but not necessarily in the sense that we understand science, because we, of course, describe science with terms that the Greeks gave us: hydrology, geology. Scientific and technical terminology didn't exist before the Greeks, but of course there was observation of nature by humans, and the way they recorded it a lot of times was in allegory or through symbolism. And a lot of these sites contain those types of symbols, those kinds of symbols that we would relate to a scientific principle, perhaps. You could say that the mountain provides pure water and sustenance to the people, and without understanding that there's some type of static hydraulic force that's taking place in pressure that's making the water come out of the mountain in a spring. So there's science there, but there's also allegory and symbolism that is how it's expressed through these megalithic sites, and it's not a easy puzzle to put together. Karnak, there's a chapter in the book on Karnak based on the translation of the research from Pierre Moreau, who's a lot of people probably not familiar with because his work was never translated into English before we did in this book. But he has a wonderful theory where he believes Karnak and the standing stones there acted as a ancient seismograph that allowed them to study the movements of the earth and the tremors that took place in the earth, and to record them and measure them. So while there was a aspect of spirituality, I think there was also an aspect of practicality. These sites, with the astronomy and with the geology and the geography, and they really represented in some way earth science centers of their time, where people came to learn and to practice and to create in relationship and in harmony and balance with the greater world around them, the universe, and the different planes of their existence, be it celestial or the underworld, or where they exist, in the world of the living. So, when you try to say were they used for just one thing, I don't think you can.
No,
I think you can say they were used for
Many.
many different things
by
some very smart, ingenious people.
Yes, well, certainly they had a lot of geniuses amongst them, because if your philosophy is trying to maintain your balance, which I think is key to attaining higher consciousness. I found Chapter 13, Mission Malta, Exploring Sounds and Energy Properties of Ancient Architecture, just so fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about that particular chapter? Because you did touch on altering consciousness through communicating with other realms.
Yes, and I think that was a big part of the temple, purpose of the temples at Malta, and the society, the ancient culture that existed on Malta thousands and thousands of years ago, a matriarchal society. It's interesting to note. I think the women kind of ran the show there, and it was also a very peaceful culture. For thousands of years it existed. It was pre-literate. They had no form of writing, but they had art. And and what's interesting to note is that there are no depictions in any of the ancient Malta culture inscriptions or artwork of anything pertaining to war or violence or invasion. No spears or shields or chariots or depictions of battles. Apparently, they lived in peace and harmony for thousands of years on Malta, creating this temple culture. And as I explained earlier, these temples have a very specific configuration to their architecture. There are no sharp edges. Everything is very rounded. Maybe as a reflection of the goddess figure that was revered, and many archaeological findings support this goddess figure, a very large Zoptic woman who probably had a great voice. And,
boy, was that neat! No, really, it was. I was able to understand more about that symbolism of it. I'm sorry, I couldn't help bumping
that's
in there.
fine. No, I appreciate that. And there, in fact, those goddesses and their voices may have been the impetus to what are known as the sirens in the Greek mythology.
Yes.
Of course, Greek mythology was, which is thousands of years old, refers to a time that's thousands of years before the Greeks. And when many of these unusual creatures inhabited the mythological creatures inhabited the islands and the coasts around the Mediterranean, and these sirens, these women with great voices that in some ways were used as weapons, may have been kind of the secret behind the Malta temple culture and the goddess figures who ruled there. I don't want to say that it was simply a feminine ruled culture. It may have been a culture that there was a proper balance between the roles of men and women, as existed with Native American culture. There was a strong prominence on the woman's role and in leadership in the group, and there was a balance. And of course, we don't have any such balance today, but it may have been the secret to societies living for many, many generations in peace and in harmony and in balance. That relationship between the men and the women and how they worked it out. So Malta is a fascinating place. If anybody ever has the chance to visit there, it's wonderful. The climate is great. The people are friendly. They speak English. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a beautiful mix of the ultra ancient with the with modern conveniences. So I highly recommend Malta as a place to visit.
And great photos. Great photos. Once again, did you take many of these photos?
Yeah, the Malta ones, yes. That was
The carved wave guide ceiling channel.
In the Hippogeum, yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating. This is so some of these temples, like the Hippogeum, is located underground, and was actually a necropolis, a burial vault for the dead, a city of the dead. Only discovered in 1900 by accident. This amazing 3-leveled underground, carved from coralline limestone. Beautiful, beautiful chambers, very aesthetic. I believe 1,000 years before the pyramids. These are quite ancient and just mind-boggling, really, in how they pulled this off and created these beautiful forms. Really impressive.
There are so many other wonderful chapters in here. We'd never have time to really get to them all, but that's the reason why I had to read every word in this book. I mean, it was exciting from the standpoint of I knew what I wanted to do. It took me about a week to read your book, because and one of these days, if we ever get together, I'm going to show you my copy of the book, your book, in which every page is written on. Every page is highlighted. This book has now become my resource for. I can find any piece of information I want now by having read this thing in some detail and taking my time. Great job, really. I can't overemphasize that. It's so thrilling to me because my interest in this work was back there in the late 70s, early 80s, and you have carried this work so much further. That's why I'm so thrilled by it. I never thought this was going to be opened up again in this kind of way, with the quality of the publication, reliable information, which is really key, because in the past, even though many of these other researchers that we've interviewed, they were some of the first that got involved in it, and of course they made some mistakes. But God bless them all, and yourself. But, we got to take a break here while we're blessing everybody. Yes, indeed, I was going to be a priest at one time. And when I focused on well, I won't get into that. But it changed my mind.
Hello, I'm Michael Bastine, co-author of Iroquois Supernatural, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and we hope you enjoy all the work that we're doing for the people.
Glenn, who made these things and when?
Well, I think the most likely candidates for the ones in the Northeast are the Native American tribes that have inhabited this area since the end of the last ice age. There are other theories. There are folks who, if you go back 20 or 30 years, there's a lot of feelings that there was a Celtic influence, that there may have been some visitations from groups from other parts of the world that may have influenced some of this. And I don't discount that entirely. I just think that it's quite possible that the very first people who came to this region came from places where these types of beliefs were already taking place. Sun worship, goddess worship. These were some of the very first religious practices of the people who wandered the globe. I do think there is room for early pre-Columbian transoceanic voyages to have brought people here, not necessarily 10 or 12,000 years ago, but 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and through diffusion spread their ideas. They could have influenced some of the native tribes and groups that were already here, an exchange of ideas, cultural cross-pollination. I think a lot of that took place. You have civilizations in the Midwest of America, the Adena, the Hopewellian, early Mississippian cultures who were mound builders and built great cities and structures of earthen mounds. The Ohio Serpent Mount is a great example, Cahokia.
Yeah.
But they also were influencers and were influenced by other cultures who they came in contact with. And certainly a lot of the mounds that we see in the Northeast made of stone are still mounds made by mound builders. They just used whatever material they had, and here it happened to be stone, because in the Catskills, you got more stone than you got earth. If you ask any of the farmers around here, they'll tell you you're not going to be growing any big crops unless you're in the valley floor, which is where all the soil on the slopes has eroded and washed away down to since the end of the last ice age. So I do think it's the indigenous population who inhabited this region for thousands of years who built many of these. In some cases, they may be memorials. In some cases, actual burial sites, although there would be nothing but the stone left. I mean, with the kind of environment you have in the Northeast, the type of fauna, the flora, the climate, things, it's not like the desert. Things don't last. They deteriorate very quickly. Any bone, any leather, any wood, forget 500, forget 5,000, even 500 years ago, it's probably not going to remain unless it's stone. And that's pretty much what the record is in the ground around here of the native population. It's stone artifacts. And unfortunately, a lot of these stone mounds and effigy walls are not considered artifacts by the historians. And that's why many of these sites kind of fall between the gaps of classification when it comes to archaeology and anthropology. They're kind of the redheaded stepchild. They get very little attention, and it's a shame, but it is changing. As I mentioned, there are more and more researchers who are beginning to believe and understand that sites like this do exist and they're important. And they really shouldn't be ignored.
Certainly shouldn't. I think, being an author, that no matter what happens, you usually can't fit all the information in a book that you really want to. So what's not in this book that you wish was?
Well, that's true. Being an author, you work with deadlines. So when you're doing research, your discoveries don't always line up with your deadlines. So the deadline for this book came and went, and the discoveries kept coming. So there have been a few interesting things that I've come across just in the past year or so since I've turned in the manuscript. I wish, and you call the publisher and you write an email and you say, hey, can I get one more thing in? And they're like, nope, sorry, that's it, you're done.
Store's closed.
They say, wait for the next edition, or, gives you a reason to write another book. So there was a wonderful site called the Lily Pond Stone. Somebody sent me a picture of this stone up on this beautiful cliff top in the Hudson Valley known as Sky Top. Amazing site. May have actually been when there were glacier lakes in the interior when the glaciers were receding, and there were what you might call sky islands, high points in the land that were above the glacier lakes that could be inhabited. Skytop was probably one of those locations, and this stone up there, beautiful, probably 20 to 30 ton boulders set up. It's a dolmen, really. It's set up on 3 base stones. And it has a gap at the bottom that on the summer solstice, a shaft of light at sunset penetrates through the base of the stones and projects a perfect triangle onto the back of the of one of the base stones. You really have to see there to be there and see this and appreciate it. But it only happens for a few days a year, and to me, it's a symbol of both sun worship and the Tanit symbol, the equilateral triangle with the point up and the 2 points down is an ancient symbol of the Tanit, or the female feminine goddess. So, to me, this is a good example of evidence that may point to an ancient culture that both were sun worshippers and goddess worshippers, and commemorated those beliefs in the setting up of a monument that both lit up with this. A friend of mine looked at it, he said, that's a glow hole, because there's just this bright, beautiful triangle projecting through at the solstice onto the stone. And to me, it represents both the sacred goddess and the sun coming in conjunction at this one site. So, that'll certainly be in any new book that comes out, or any new published research. The Lily Pond Stone. I think that's an important site that's just kind of come on the radar.
Well, obviously, you have a message in this book, but what message do you want readers to take away from this book?
Well, I guess the message would be that these sites hold a message to be decoded and to understand, and it's probably an important message about our own existence and how we can fit in better with our world, again, in balance and in harmony. I point out towards the end of the book how in Japan, when there was this terrible tsunami from the earthquake a few years ago that destroyed the nuclear plant, there were articles in the newspaper I came across of this early warning system up and down the coast for hundreds of miles. Just inland from the coast were a series of large megalithic stones that were set up. The most recent one, 600 years ago, but these were set up for many, many generations and years before that. Just the most recent one was 600 years ago, but they date back much further. And it was a early warning system in a sense, in that each one of these stones, located miles apart from each other, but in a line up the coast, had the same message, which was to live in peace and harmony. Don't build your dwellings beyond this point. So it was telling them where it was safe to live and where it was not safe to live. And of course, these warning markers were ignored, and people built and developed right along the coast, and inevitably a wave came along and destroyed it all. So the stones hold a message that's important to understand. If you know how to read it, to read them correctly, it could in fact be life-saving. In some of these more monumental structures, when we talk about the pyramids and places like Malta and Stonehenge, many think there is encoded within them the times and dates that we are most vulnerable to cataclysmic events that could alter our life and our existence. So there is an important message to understand. It's not fully decoded or understood or appreciated, but I think we're slowly getting there. Hopefully it won't be too late.
Yeah, very slowly. And we're going to pay a heavy price, an extremely heavy price, because we are not ready. We are not ready for what is coming. And what is coming is there's going to be continued flooding, especially in the area of Florida, New Orleans, Houston, etc. And boy, that story, the real story about how Houston became so vulnerable, people should read that. And it was about greed, and it has a lot to do with, we have to keep on building this, and we got to do it in this kind of way. basically Houston may and eventually go out of business. And New York Times did an incredible story dealing on New Orleans, 4 or 5 pages showing the problems that will not go away and will continue. And
in Houston, they ignored the signs that the land held a message for them where they should and shouldn't build. And they ignored it, and to their own detriment. And we ignore these messages to our own detriment. And we have to understand, if we can't live in harmony with our planet, the planet will live without us. We can't destroy the planet.
That's right.
The planet can destroy us and go right on fine without us.
The planet doesn't need us.
Yeah, it sure doesn't.
It doesn't. It needs the animals, that's for sure. It needs the vegetation, but it doesn't need us. And I'm just so saddened by the fact that we have some states where you can't even talk about this being illegal. Some places in Florida, you're not allowed to talk about it, not allowed to even say the words. Total ignorance, and I think that'll lead to devastation. I want to thank you for joining us, Glenn. This has been a wonderful experience for me, and I've learned so much from you. And it's wonderful to have so many good mentors who work so hard at this, to present this material to the public, because we need to return to balance. The Native Americans knew how to do it. And for them to be punished because, as some of the people have basically said to me, hey, who cares about the Native Americans? They didn't invent any cars. They didn't invent our new sewing machines, that kind of stuff. That's their opinion. Thank you for joining us, Glenn. And that's the show. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington, and I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus.